Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs, and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
And now I'd like to do a brief introduction of each panelist. For more information, you can find their full bios on the CWA website. And these are going to be very brief introductions because this is day 3. I think many of you have probably seen some of our speakers on previous panels. And as they said, you can look up their full bios. They're all 3 very impressive, and if I went through their bios, it would take a long time. I will start with Eric Zimmerman, who is next to me. Eric Zimmerman is a game designer and a professor of game design. He's also one of the people who really started game design as an academic area of study. Next to him is Daniel Watson, who I think of as Olivia Pope from Scandal. He's been in communications, working for the government in various administrations in various areas, including FEMA, the Treasury Department, and Homeland Security. A lot of important communications there. He's also worked in the private sector. And finally, Joe Cirincione, who has been working in nuclear nonproliferation for many, many years in many, many places.
Yeah.
And just,
Many places.
yeah, he's got, I mean, look him up. He's written a ton, and his work is quite important. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk about how they utilize or think about games or game design thinking in their work, and how, if they're not using it, how they might use it to expand the way they think. And I'll just mention briefly that of course, Eric is a game designer, so this idea was kind of loosely based on one of his books, which is The Rules We Break, which uses games and game design thinking as a way to evolve systems, make them more effective. And when I say systems, this could be organizations, but it could also be the US government, for example. So, Eric?
Okay. Alexis wanted me to start, and I'm happy to do that. And also, I asked Alexis if maybe this is a slightly unusual panel, so if we could, I might take a little bit more than the usual, like 3 to 4 minutes, and I might ask you to interact, or ask if you want to interact a little bit too. But just to sort of kind of set the frame. For me, one way of thinking about what this panel is about, and by the way, I am just incredibly excited to have this conversation, because I really like to think about not just games that we play for fun, but what I do as a game designer, which includes making a lot of commercial entertainment games, but also making games for educational contexts, for art contexts, a whole variety of stuff. How is what I do as a game designer potentially relevant to things outside of games? And I'll give you an example. I'm not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV, although evidently some of our panelists do, or are on TV, resemble TV characters. So but my understanding is that part of how medical training happens today is that doctors have these mock patients that they interact with. So that means that there's a fake body, like a plastic sort of cadaver laying in a hospital bed, but it's all wired up So you can like take its temperature, you can get different kinds of readings from it, and you can even talk to it because there's often an instructor doctor looking behind a one-way mirror who actually has a microphone and is sort of can talk to you. So this is a situation that simulates a patient and a doctor, and the doctor basically is setting up like puzzles. It's a lot like level design. It's so clear to me that this is game design, right? I mean, this is obviously the doctor sets up a kind of game, a sort of level or puzzle. It's sort of like a little role-playing game situation, and it sort of blows my mind, right? That this is game design sort of right in the heart of some very interesting and important educational training. But I guess what I want to say is that it's interesting to think about what can that do and what are its limits, right? We wouldn't say though that therefore this game is going to solve find the cure for cancer, right? Like this is not a game that's going to kind of solve the world's problems, but this is an example of like using game design or game design thinking in an interesting way that could lead to that, right? In the training of doctors. So that's but let me. I always think it's better to actually play or do something than just talk about it. So I'm gonna see if we can start with an exercise. I'm gonna explain to you what's gonna happen. Of course, you don't have to play. You never are forced to play. If you're forced to play, it's not play. I think by definition, it's like it's work. It's like a labor camp or something. This is not that situation. So, but this is a game, a very simple game called Five Fingers. So I'll explain how to play, and then you can decide if you want to join in. But what you're going to do, if you want to play, you'll sort of turn around in your chairs and find a little group of people around you. So you want to play with like 4, 5, 6, 7 people around you in seats. You may have to turn around. You may have to meet some strangers and say hello. It's totally fine. It's a very, very easy game. How do you play? Everybody is going to hold up one hand with 5 fingers. These are your 5 fingers. These are your life. You don't want to lose these fingers because if you're out of fingers, then you're out of the game, okay? So with the 4, 5, 6, 7 of you sort of turn to face each other in sort of a circle. One of you is going to start, and you'll sort of go around the circle and play. And what do you do on your turn? On your turn, here's how you play. Good, I can hear the mumblings of group formation happening already. Great, I love it. So, but wait, I haven't told you how to play yet. So what do you actually do on your turn? This is what you do. You point at somebody else, and they lose a finger. Ooh. And that's the game. That's the whole game. Okay, Joe's already sensing the drama here. So and then you just go around the circle in order. Does that make sense? So that's the whole game. It's an incredibly simple game. If you want to play, now is the time to sort of turn, face, say hello to some people you might. Again, if you don't want to play, you can watch, but I recommend that you play. It's very fast. Okay, so hold up your 5 fingers. One of you start, point at somebody else, and they lose a finger. And then you keep going. If you're out of fingers, you're out of the game. The last survivor is the winner. I forgot to say. The last remaining player is the winner. Okay. I'm going to go observe a little bit.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. That's good. Game of survival.
Yes. Circular firing squad.
He's observing.
Just go around the circle. Take turns around the circle. Just take turns around the circle.
Oh, that's good.
It's getting close over here.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting.
People don't want to kill each other. That's what I'm seeing. cheese.
She has a sister who's a computer scientist, also and they both Jane McGonnell's book, reality is broken.
It's interesting. It's such a participatory crowd. People just jumped into it right
I know.
away.
I know.
Let's go.
The simplicity of it.
I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, so sorry, you guys, man. I win.
Your the game instructor is walking through the
Okay, I
audience.
think it's
here.
almost over.
Okay, bigger groups, try and finish up your games. I know there's a lot of maybe some hesitancy to cruelly eliminate your fellow players. We're just waiting for this obviously extremely deliberative group here in the middle too. Right. Okay. They're so involved they don't even know we're talking about them right now. Okay. My condolences. Let me. All right. Is there? Does anyone want to make any quick observations about your experience just now? Yes.
I wanted our youngest member to survive.
Oh, you did? Oh, interesting. Wow. So you created a whole narrative in your head about who should be pushed off the lifeboat last. That is fascinating. That has never come up in this game before. Yeah, quick one.
You gave us a couple of basic rules, and so we only had 3, but there was a certain amount of wayfinding we had to do around the rules in our group.
Oh, because so that the.
But you didn't say whether first out is the winner or last out is the winner, so we decided to do that.
Oh, I love that. So you were, first of all, yes, it's very different with larger number, smaller number, and I love it that you invented additional winning conditions. So really, the person in the middle was the one that, yeah.
Every family has their own rules for Monopoly.
Yes,
They don't follow the party
absolutely. You are making all of my important points right here. Yes, one more. By the way, should I be repeating these comments so they can be heard on the stream? So the first comment was about keeping the youngest member into the end, and this player is you're telling us how in your group, because you had only 3 people, you decided that the first out and the last out both were winners. So I love that.
Eric, did you see when you were walking around, was everybody kind of like, oh, one at a time, or were there any groups that were like, that person, we're all going to get that person?
I think I both saw groups that were incredibly meticulous to sort of prune it in a very even manner, and I also saw some dogpile and retribution, which always happens in this game.
This game to me is a lot easier when you don't know the other people.
Interesting, right? Or you could say it would change if you know them, right? Maybe it's
No real consequence.
right. Maybe it's easier to sort of have this playful cruelty with strangers, or maybe it's more satisfying if you do it with friends.
Yeah, I assumed we were all a team, and I was a class paladin, so I tried to keep everybody in.
I love that. I love that idea.
It sounds like we were a group of 7, and we actually needed a facilitator to like remind us of who's next.
Right. So just for the stream, yeah, we're having here a group he was trying to sort of, you took it upon yourself to try and even out the distribution, and here you would have liked another moderator role. All right, so these are really, really interesting comments that I don't want to take up too much time with this exercise, but just to make a few points. I think that for me as a game designer, games like this are interesting because there's a relationship between, for example, games in the world that we live in right now. So I would say that if you think about the way that media has evolved over time, I'm going to make some very, very big generalizations. But in the 20th century, if let's say the moving image was a dominant form of culture, right? It wasn't the only form of culture. There was theater and literature and music, but in terms of government propaganda or advertising, personal stories, the way that kind of epic national mythologies were spun out, I think film and television were a very, very dominant form of the way that those stories were told and the way that people understood who they were relative to each other in the world. And I think that in the 21st century, something has changed, something has shifted. Our media, and I'm not the only person to observe this, but our media are becoming more participatory, more dynamic, more interactive. We have something, you don't go to an encyclopedia to get information with sort of handed down from experts. You go to Wikipedia, where the lines between the creators and the consumers of the information are blurry, right? Where it's a whole kind of social dynamic system that's generating that information. And so I guess all I'm trying to say is that today, in the 21st century, our media are becoming more interactive, modular, systemic, whatever you want to call it. And games, to me, are one way of thinking about these shifts, because games are an ancient form of human culture. Our species' oldest games are at least 10,000 years old, out of Africa and Egypt and the Far East. And games have always been modular, systemic, interactive, participatory. Every game is a little laboratory for pushing and pulling at sort of inputs and outputs to see how cause and effect works. So for me, games are an interesting way of thinking about literacy today, how we make and share and understand meaning, but also potentially for understanding our world in which we live. Because we are living in a world of systems, right? That increasingly we live in a networked, globalized, systemic world. And my hope is that, again, this could be me being myopic because I'm a game designer, so I'm thinking about things in terms of games. But I guess the premise of this panel is that games could be a way or a lens for understanding how the world works. And for example, in this idea, this very simple game that we played, Five Fingers, we already see a lot of sort of very fundamental aspects of games that we could highlight. For example, games are about rules. I had to explain the rules to you. I sort of had to list the rules, right? But as soon as you started playing, one doesn't just follow the rules. We immediately started seeing all kinds of creative play. Sometimes actually inventing new rules, like a new winning conditions. Other times it's sort of a new narrative framework around the game, new social rules, or new sort of inventing how we are going to behave and interact with each other. So for me, games are interesting in a whole bunch of different ways that maybe we'll explore, and I'll try and shut up in a second. But the idea is that we can think about games as simulations and models. We can think about games as a way that we learn, like the way that we train doctors, as I said before. We also can think about game design thinking as sort of a way of being or understanding systems that potentially could help us think about some of our broken systems, like democracy, for example. Alexis mentioned government systems, right? That there's okay, I'll finish just by thinking about one broken government system that's an obvious one, gerrymandering, right? So our electoral system, and there's even a panel later today that I'm very excited about, which is about fixing the broken electoral system. But one of the reasons why it's broken, there's several, but one of the reasons why, for me, it's broken is because every 10 years after the census happens, in most states, of the 50 states, it's the party in power that gets to redraw the districts, right? So any game designer would tell you this is a horrible, what we would call a positive feedback loop or snowball effect. You reward the winners, right? Because today, a couple hundred years ago when this system was designed, there wasn't software that lets you modify block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, exactly strategizing how to pack your opposition or crack them and dilute their power, right? So that you can extremely strategically design these districts. But today, that software does exist, so you have people playing the game very well, but not in the spirit for which it was designed. So however, in games that have positive feedback loops, that have these snowball effects where the winners get entrenched, right? Again, you reward the winners by putting them in power, then they get to re-entrench their position even more, which then lets them be even more in power, and then 10 years later, so that's the sort of snowball effect that we're getting with things like gerrymandering. But in games, for example, if you think about the game of pool, billiards, right? There's a positive feedback loop. Yeah, okay, yeah. So, all right, we won't you go to the billiards example, but you get the idea. So, I'm very excited about this. We'll talk more.
Great,
Thank
great.
you.
This is great. That was great. Great.
Someone needs to shut me up. So this is Alexis's
fine.
job.
That was great.
Obviously, Eric is excited about this topic. As well he should be. All right, Dan, go for it.
Well, I'm just excited to hear from Eric on this. 'Cause I'm not a game designer. It's funny, you mentioned gerrymandering. I'm not a fan of it, but in DC, because we're weird, we actually have a board game for gerrymandering. It's called Map Maker, and it's really, really fun. So I highly recommend it. So my background is in communications, but I've worked at places where it is really important to be prepared, and games are a really good way to be prepared. So in the government setting, we think of games as exercises. So when I was at FEMA, we would call it a Thunderbolt exercise. Nobody knew it was going to happen except for the planner of the game. The administrator didn't. And on a certain day, you'd get an email, Thunderbolt. And we're told under exercise, something just happened. There's been an earthquake in the Pacific Northwest. You have to put aside all of the work that you're doing and just focus on that singular incident. And we would do it as part of communications. A response team would, like, what are you doing? Who are you talking to? And everybody comes together and thinks about it. And then you would have, I think an important part of it is it has to be dynamic. We would have what's called an inject. So something new has happened, and you have to course correct. And these are really important for a number of reasons. One, if you're going to make a mistake, better to do it in practice than in the real thing. And it also gave people an opportunity to take a little bit of a risk and test it in that environment so that you are comfortable in that moment. And also, the most important part, you identify holes. You go back, what went wrong, and then you take that and adapt it to your preparation and work. So, and obviously these are exercises of terrible things happening, but it is a little bit fun. You're doing it in a lower risk environment, and you get better at your job. Now, I've taken this, and you can apply it to so many different things. When I was consulting in private sector, a lot of the work we do is around crisis communications. And so sitting down with leaders and having them think through what are the risks and vulnerabilities for my company, and then have everybody gather around the table and just think through, if this happened, what would we do? And gaming it out. And so I think gaming and sort of play is integral to your resilience.
That's great. Thank you. Well, one of the reasons I love coming back to the Conference on World Affairs is that I get to be on panels like this, where I have no idea what they're about. And even this morning, I'm reading the description, and I go, what am I supposed to say here? And then by the time it gets to be my turn, I have a whole lot of things to say, as it turns out. So what I've been thinking about this a little differently. It's more like, what can games tell us about the current political situation we're in? What kind of games are we playing here? And a couple of classic games, come to mind, especially when you talk about the government. Chess, right? Because that's teaching you to think many moves ahead. You get a move, but the other guy gets a move. And then how are you going to counter that? Can you anticipate? Can you manipulate them into making the move that you want them to make, Very interesting. And of course, Trump, the president, is often described as a master chess player in his sphere. Poker is another government metaphor. Big bets, bluffing, folding, you know, giving up. And we've seen all of that in just the last 48 hours. Right?
Yeah, making bets with other people's money, unfortunately.
You might think of musical chairs. Musical chairs. Pete Navarro was in one of the chairs a couple of days ago, but when the decision was made to pull back the tariff, nope, no chair for you, Pete. He wasn't in the room when the decision was made. Maybe you read that story. You know, this was decided at 2:00 yesterday morning, and Pete was nowhere to be found. So we had that. Of course, you know, the game that a lot of people think of when you're dealing with this administration is Monopoly, right? And in this Monopoly game, and you probably all played a family game like this, you know, Trump is the banker, and he's cheating. And the bank, you know, he's not getting, but the purpose of the game is to acquire as much property as possible. You want Park Place, you want Boardwalk, you want Greenland, you want Canada, you know, you want the Panama Canal. You just want to get it all so you can build what? Hotels. I mean, it's pretty basic. This is what he's playing, you know? Or if you're Fox News and you're trying to explain all this, you're probably playing Twister. You know? your hands over here were love the tariffs. Oh, no, tariffs are terrible. You're playing a game, and they tie themselves up every day trying to justify whatever it is the administration has done. Or if you're reporters trying to cover the White House, you're really kind of playing a game of Clue. You're playing Clue. Clue is a who, what, where game, right? Who's killing the Constitution? What are they using to kill it? Where are they going to do it? The Oval Office, Congress, the Supreme Court? I think it's Donald Trump with the sledgehammer in the...
Elon Musk with the chainsaw.
Elon Musk with that chainsaw.
Right in public.
We're working down to some of my
Walking down
favorites.
Main Street.
But I actually, you know, this is a little more... I think the game we're actually playing with this government every day is Russian roulette. You know, every day you wake up, you pick up the gun, you spin the chamber, you put it to your head. Is this the day we die? Is this the day we die? And this country went through 2 horrible days this week. I mean, we were here in our CWA bubble, but out there, man, people were freaking out over the Russian roulette we were playing with tariffs. And you saw what happened. The bond market decided that the chamber was loaded, and we were killing U.S. financial credibility around the world. The bond market was diving, and that's, of course, as you now know, why Trump decided to pull the tariff. The equity markets go up and down. That's a fun game all by itself, you know. But the bond market, now that's serious. And when that starts to tank, you're in deep trouble. You gotta stop the game. So you pull it. I got 2 more. One is, you know, there's a lot of movies that have been made out of board games, like Clue became a movie, but there are also board games made out of movies. And the game I think we're really playing that comes closer to this is The Godfather. You know, there's a Tom Hanks movie, You Got Mail, where he says, everything you need to know about life is in The Godfather. And I really believe that. I really believe that's true. And here you're seeing the President of the United States being a mafia don. And he's doing favors for people, and he wants favors in return. And he's setting up a system, where the tariffs are a good example, where he sets up a brand new set of rules. And, you know, really nice country you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. And you want to protect your country, you have to come to him. He's the one who can protect you, who can prevent terrible things from happening to you from him, from his group. And, you know, I think the Godfather tells us a lot about how this administration is operating and how they see the world, even, you know, to the point of the 5 families. You know, Russia, China, the United States, Saudi Arabia got a seat at the table, how the 5 families, and that's the way I think Trump actually sees the world. And that's what's going on. That's why he wants to expand his territory. Expand his territory. And of course, we're in this mess because of a game show. Donald Trump is president of the United States because he played a successful businessman on a game show, The Apprentice, where he did what? He fired people. So he comes into office and he's just acting out his role. I mean, it's kind of weird when you think of it. He pretends to be a successful businessman to prove his dominance, to assert his dominance. He's just firing people. Head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you know, for example. These lawyers over here, this whole agency, just fire, fire, fire. And that's how he gets his strength. That's how he exerts his dominance. The final thing, however, I think, and this is sort of the serious way that where we could more in Eric's bailiwick, how we can learn from games here, is probably one of the best nuclear movies made in the last. You know where I'm going with this, is War Games. Yep. And it starts when Matthew Broderick hacks into a computer, and the computer asks him, "Do you want to play a game?" And of course, the game is mutually assured destruction. And that in itself, as you go through the game, that's the game we're playing sort of globally. All the 9 nuclear states are playing globally. We're playing this game of mutually assured destruction where there are certain known rules that everybody shares that you have to threaten people, but you can't threaten them too much. You know, you have to arm, but you can't arm too much. You don't want to tip the game in an unpredictable way. And of course, the game, you know, one of the lessons of that movie is that the war game, there is no winner in this game. There's no way to win this game. The only way to win that game is not to play the game. And just as a final note, and then I'll stop, is that playing war games is an essential tool in Washington. Yeah. I can't tell you how many war games or simulations or war game type situations I've been in, and the purpose is to, and they're extremely instructive because the purpose is not just to let you go test out your theory. Here's what I want to do. But it's also you get to play the other side, and in doing so, you learn how the other side is seeing it, and you understand that if you do A, what the other side can not just do B, they might do W or X. You know, and totally something you didn't expect, or they might team up, and so you learn so much from actually acting it out. And this is the kind of thing that this administration actually is not doing. Nobody war gamed these tariffs, and this is the result. When you don't play the game, when you don't game it out, this is the kind of result you get. You get things that are completely predictable for those who have gamed this out, but completely unpredictable to this administration because they just didn't think it out. This didn't go at all as they planned. So I'm a big fan of games and a big fan of the value of games in not just relieving tensions and letting us have some fun, but actually learn some very serious lessons about government policy. And I didn't think I was going to say any of that when I walked in the room.
Wow. Thank you all for those extremely stimulating remarks. Of course, Joe, when I saw that you were on this panel, immediately I thought of war games, and that was the first thing I thought of. And I'm a social psychologist, and so in psychology, our work is descriptive. We try to understand human behavior through research. And I'm noticing in the analogies that you're making to what's happening in the world that games are both descriptive and prescriptive. We learn how to become capitalists by playing Monopoly. We learn how, we learn what war is about by playing, Axis and Allies. Or there are N number of games that about dominating, countries dominating other countries. I mean, I looked it up last night and I just got overwhelmed. It was just like going on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah,
pages,
risk and strategy.
Yes, yeah. All of this. Yes, all of those, and we learn. I think a bit of distance, a psychological distance from situations, also through gaming. But these reflections, I think this went it became very deep very fast. Because it's not just simulations like war games, it's also, we can understand the world through these analogies that we share because of games. And then you've also described the slippery relationship between media, what's happening in the government, and games. And I would love it if you could continue to unpack this whole set of analogies that Joe has provided, in addition to this background of the potential for game design thinking that Eric provided.
I don't know how to, that was pretty much all I had.
Well, let's go back to Eric. I'm
Just,
sure
you
that-
know,
yeah, we can-
except the game that all of us played during COVID, which was solitaire.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting, pointing to COVID. I think COVID was actually a time when, I think particularly for young people, there was an increase in video games that provided experiences that were akin to being outside, right? There are beautiful games of design where, you know, it's not like climbing a mountain, but you can have a simulation of climbing a mountain. So I think that, I think we talk about games for solving, the puzzle that's in front of you might solve a problem, but it can also solve, mental problems and challenges by being able to provide some sort of release and expansion out of that.
Can I ask you two a question?
Yeah.
You both mentioned the idea that the government uses sort of simulations or games as part of, I don't want to say training, but just part of understanding problems, processes. I'm really curious how those games are designed and how you really know that the assumptions about how they operate are accurate, right? Because that's always, a game is always a radical simplification of the real world. So Daniel, even when you mention a virtual mountain, it's obviously not as rich in terms of sensory experience and natural ecosystems. It's some kind of like cartoon version of the real world. And so even a deep and complicated simulation that might take a whole week to play out, is obviously not for FEMA, for maybe an arms negotiation. It's never going to be as rich and detailed as the real world. But I'm just really curious, how do you know, or what's the sense that these games are in any way accurate, right? Like I would love to hear a little bit more about what goes into them in terms of their design and training. I know they're designed by experts, but there's a difference between, as Alexis says, just describing, this is what happened at this historical moment, and sort of actively creating sort of algorithms and rules that are going to determine, if you do this, then this will definitely happen in the game, right? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so this is a funny thing to say, but in Washington, games is serious business. This is, one of my best friends did war games for Booz Allen Hamilton for 20 years. And this involved, top level people. This is like cabinet secretaries would play these games, or a level or two down. And they would work for weeks on designing the game to get it as accurate as possible. What would Bahrain do in this situation? And how do we know that? Because the point is to get it as accurate as possible, to give some predictive power to the policymakers who are playing it, and then they're moderated. So everybody gets to play a role. You're the president, you're the Secretary of Defense, you're the head of naval forces, and everybody plays a role. And there's moves that you play, and then the team will analyze those moves and then design the next round to make sure it's accurate. And if somebody goes too far, if somebody does something that they don't think would actually happen in the real world, there is an intervention and they're corrected. They're corrected. And so this gets all the way to the question of, would you push the button? Would you actually launch a nuclear strike, even though our doctrine is to launch a nuclear strike under this particular circumstance? When you're in that circumstance, do you actually do it?
The games have gotten much more sophisticated too. I'll give you an example of a pilot that was done at DHS last year. So U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, one of the important roles of asylum officers is sitting down for an interview with somebody who is making a claim for asylum and has gone through, potentially very traumatic experience. The way this has been done in the past is you hire actors, and the person sits down and works with an actor. Have certain factors that a asylum officer would have to find and know in order to determine if it was a credible claim. And so this they still did in-person trainings, but this is something that an asylum officer could do at any time, log in and do it, and never been able to do before. So I think the application for these sorts of trainings or games is only amplifying now as a result of AI to be able to fine-tune the reality of these scenarios.
Yeah, I've got a huge slew of questions,
Yeah.
actually. So obviously, you guys have struck a chord. I have a whole stack that are asking specific global policy questions about Iraq, Israel, China, Ukraine, Russia, and how war games are being employed to address those situations. And also people are asking for national security secrets, I think. So I'm just going to throw out a few here so you can. This one I think is specifically for Eric, who I know has talked about this, about the history of Monopoly and how it's been subverted. Right.
Well, that's it's funny, Joe, that you brought up Monopoly, and I was thinking about that too. Anyway, maybe this is more of like a Trivial Pursuit aside, but Monopoly.
Trivial Pursuit.
Monopoly was designed originally by a woman named Elizabeth McGee in the early 20th century, and she was actually an extraordinary woman who was way ahead of her time and really like one of our early kind of modern game designers. She designed a game called the Landlord's Game, which was meant as a protest against tax policy. And she invented this whole format of that. This was coming out of a sort of the Victorian era of board games that were incredibly dull. They were like Candyland minus stuff. It was you roll, you move, you roll, you move, and there was really nothing to them. But she designed this whole game where there was an economy and you were buying and selling properties, but everything was auctioned, and it was really meant to show the problems with the existing kind of landlord-based sort of taxation system. So it was really an interesting kind of radical political protest in the form of a game. There was a long history whereby her design was stolen from her and eventually, became Monopoly. And in a funny way, it really became like the very thing that she set out to critique, which was rampant capitalism. And Monopoly is sort of the icon of it, as your invocation of the game shows now. So there's definitely, if you peel back the layers of history a little bit in games, there's always kind of interesting things happening there. But I guess I should say that there is a long history. We could look at the Landlord's Game of people thinking about using games not just for entertainment purposes, but as a simulation of reality, or to make a political point, or to to sort of get ideas out there into the world.
Yeah. Yes, thanks for that. And as you were talking about over here, the how people are role playing out these different situations, and somebody's playing the president, and I was just thinking the wild card, that how does one simulate a wild card president where it's very difficult to predict that behavior. Anyone can answer that or not. And then somebody actually asked a question that was almost exactly the same one. They said, how can we apply game design thinking to chaotic, irrational actors?
But there actually, in these simulations, there are random mechanics, right? Sometimes there actually is randomness kind of thrown into the system. Isn't that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. On this issue, Paul Krugman has a post on his Substack today where he's talking about Donald Trump. It's completely the opposite. He's not a random, unpredictable. He's very predictable. And there are buttons you can push. And Putin knows how to push those buttons, And the businessmen, the billionaires who intervened in the last couple of days or day to get him to pull back the tariffs also know how to push those buttons. And you know, Trump in this process this week, as Krugman talks about it, you know, has revealed himself to be, you know, weak, stupid, erratic, and weak is the way Krugman describes him. And by, you know, in some ways, by watching him play this role over and over again, you do understand the predictability. You do know he will back down. He'll say whatever he needs to say. He'll lie about everything. But in the end, you know, if you threaten him enough, you can get him to do what you want.
Yeah, I mean, the past few months have been interesting where, on the one hand, you know, every day it's, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. But on the other hand, it's, oh wait, he's doing everything he said he was going to do.
Exactly, right. And on the other hand, so I was thinking again about my Olivia Pope analogy, and I was thinking that actually this administration is demonstrating that scandal scenario where there's somebody like behind the scenes pulling the levers to make sure everything is okay, doesn't exist, right?
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Right. The current scandal that people are talking about is who knew that Trump was going to pull back on the tariffs in between 2 o'clock in the morning and he made the decision and 1:3 in the afternoon when he announced it, and who benefited from insider trading in that 12 hours. I mean, that's the current scandal.
Right.
Yeah. And there was a question about that as well. There was some kind of you know, predictive games used to manipulate the market so that you know, people could profit off of this chaos that was planned, right? It's utterly planned, as you said.
Right. So, I mean, this is kind of interesting because yesterday there was a hearing at the House, and you may be seeing one of the Democratic congressman was going after the nominee, and it went kind of viral because he was so mad because the witness was trying to say this was all planned, and he says, well, if it's planned, that's market manipulation. Well, no, it's not market manipulation. Oh, so it wasn't planned. No, it was planned. Well, and so you get into this.
Yeah. So we're all making these predictions. So someone just brought this question. Says, please examine how fear enters the you know, this game analogy in global politics. I thought of The Godfather when you know, I read that.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, part of, Joe mentioned poker, for example. And I think one of the interesting things about games is that, on the one hand, they are abstract mathematical systems, right? I mean, the rules that I taught you for that 5-finger game, they're abstract mathematical rules. They're logical rules. You point at someone, you do this. But as soon as it enters into actual human beings and we're playing the game, all of these layers of psychological and emotional experience take over. So, for example, in poker, there actually are no rules about bluffing. Bluffing is an emergent effect of poker, right? Because part of poker is what game designers sometimes call a donkey space, which is that, okay, for me to play the game, I have to have a little model of you in my head. So I have to think about what you're thinking in order for me to play. But I know that you also have a model of me in your head. So I have to think about what you're thinking about, what I'm thinking about, what you're thinking about, what I'm thinking about, and it becomes a sort of hall of mirrors. And that's this kind of very complex social space, right? And that's why I think it's interesting, and I would be skeptical if AI can ultimately model that kind of social space, right? Depending on what the game is trying to do, but certainly in terms of these negotiations and getting at that sort of fear, I think that's a little bit why games potentially are powerful tools, because they both have the human element, and then they also have this sort of policy making rule element too, and they kind of bring them together within these interactive systems.
Right, and then the psychological, of course,
exactly.
because this getting into someone else's head.
Right.
Joe.
And on this fear issue, I mean, the Hunger Games, the Squid Game, I mean, you see fear as the driver of the action of what happens. And it also teaches you something, that fear cannot just propel an individual, it can also be a force for forming alliances. In the national security world, we don't talk about fear, we talk about security imperatives. but that's what it is. You're afraid of something, and then from these games, you can extrapolate out to understand NATO better. I mean, here's a group of countries that really have major differences with each other and really don't like each other. Look at the French and the Germans. But their fear of a greater enemy, forges them together and propels them together. And a lot of that is illustrated in a very stripped down and simple way by watching things like the Hunger Game and the Squid Game.
I mean, another thought too is decision-making in moments of fear might not have the best outcome, right? And so the benefit of a game is prompting that and provoking that decision-making in a safer scenario so that you can come to it more rationally when it actually happens.
Right, and I think that your comments are about how this game is better or different with strangers or with friends is interesting, right? That the game is sort of a safe space where we can do things that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to do, right? Like try out this idea of pushing the button, for example, right, within the space of the game. Thinking about that, I feel like I have this sort of amazing moment to have both of you I have a couple questions I want to ask you two. Sorry, Alexis said it was okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
One question is...
That's the point.
I think part of what's interesting to me about games is that I studied art originally. I was a painter, so I come from the art making world. I ended up as a game designer. When you're making art, you sort of make it in your studio, you put it in the gallery, and you're making a beautiful object for contemplation, and it's great. But with a game, it's really unpredictable what's going to happen. Right? Like I said, bluffing emerges out of poker, all this creative play that we saw, you can't predict it. So games are developed differently. You can't just make it in your studio and then put it out there. You have to try it out and test it and iterate. We call that play testing or the iterative process. And I think it's interesting because you have to make a prototype, play it, see what happens, do it again. And it strikes me that most government policy does not do that. Right? It's not based on iteration. Hey, let's try this out here, see what happens. Let's try this out here. I know that sometimes there are limited test runs of things, whatever it is, universal basic income or different way to think about the elections. The experiments sort of happen as people kind of push them to. But I think about do you two think that there's a possibility within policy development of somehow adopting this idea that we don't know everything, we have to try out solutions and somehow find ways to play test them rather than thinking that we know everything and kind of dropping these big policy bombs on, we're going to cut taxes for this big group and this, I believe that this is going to have these results, but is there a way to more iteratively design policy so that it ends up being based on results or potential results rather than on this sort of ideological aspirations of the way we think it might function?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm telling you, war games are not just about military situations. My friend, this colleague who did it for Booz Allen, did lots of games with the financial community. Mm-hmm. They modeled out the 2008 financial collapse before it happened. I mean, there was people knew that this dynamic was, and they gamed it, and they predicted that the problem was we didn't just didn't act on it, and there were all kinds of ways of electric grid patterns. How you can game that out.
Where the breakdowns are going to happen, for example, and when and why.
Exactly. Yeah. So and people do these tools are used all the time.
So maybe it's about somehow finding the connective tissue between the policy makers and the people doing this kind of research.
Well, but see, for a whole lot of this, the gamers are hired by the government to do it with the government officials so they can see what would happen. And this is true for transportation, too. If we do the rail line here, what kind of development are we going to get? Can the grid support it? What's going to happen with the taxes? They do game that out. The problem often is that those lessons learned run into political realities and aren't applied.
Yeah, there are two games. The first game is what's the best outcome? What's the policy? The second game is how do you get it done?
Yeah.
And the game board in the past has many times been the states, right? You test a policy in a state and then see if it catches on, and you can apply it elsewhere.
The laboratories of democracy.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right, like, and sometimes it's very successful and sometimes it's not. So I had a stack of questions that all allude to similar things. One says, who can change the rules of the game? Namely, how can we, the people, change the game? Related, what should our role be as outsiders watching these games our government is playing? And finally, how do we fire the host and start a new game, which is blank? Feel free to take any of those
Let me
provocations.
just do two quick things on this. So, the War Games movie, the lesson of that is don't play the game, right? But it's hard not to play the game. And how I'm going to give you a personal... So yes, let's get out of here, let's overturn the board, let's not do this. I was on the Colbert Report many years ago, and I should have known this, but I didn't. He made me play a game. And it was an adaptation of a popular, like, high school and college girls game, really. It was marry, date, or bomb. And he gave me 3 countries: Iran, North Korea, and Pakistan. And who would I marry, who would I date, and who would I bomb?
Wow.
And I said,
Wow.
I'm the president of the Plowshares Fund. I don't want to play that game. I don't want to play. Oh, come on. No, I tried not to play the game. And he just a simple game. And he made me play the game, and I ended up, I don't know what it was, marrying Iran, dating Pakistan, and bombing North Korea. And he says, I can't believe the president of Plowshares Fund bombed North Korea. So my lesson is sometimes you're just trapped. You just got to play the game and take the consequences.
I would answer that with another question for you two, which is that it's one thing to simulate taxes or the electrical grid, and then maybe it's another thing to go even deeper and look at, like, what are the rules by which our democracy functions, right? I mean, I mentioned gerrymandering, the Electoral College. There's rules about how the Senate operates, for example, and filibustering, and I wonder if we could apply the same thinking to that. Like, would it be possible my fantasy would be to have some game designers working with policy people to think about these kind of constitutive rules of democracy and really say, like, the system is broken. And are there ways, and I know that there is already a lot of thinking and research about how to fix some of these broken democratic systems, but, I think, the challenge is that there are rules that constitute how to change the rules, right? Those rules are really hard to change, right? So they make it difficult to change these basic rules.
Let me put that back at you. 1,000,000 years ago, when I was in college, I played the Buckminster-Fuller World Game, which was aimed at just that.
Right.
It's trying to think of, what are the rules for the world to produce a more evenly distributed, et cetera, fairer, equitable. Do we do that anymore?
I don't. Well, the
and this was a 2-week-long.
It was. Yeah,
session.
And who did you play in the game? Do you remember? Everyone is a country. If I remember.
Don't remember who I.
Yeah, the Buckminster Fuller Foundation. I've asked them many times for their rules. I was always curious to see, and they're very protective of them. I think that they license it out to schools for things. But there is definitely a movement for educators to use games and game-like thinking in the classroom. And for anyone that's interested, there's a wonderful conference in New York City called Games for Change that happens every summer that's specifically about how games can be used for education, for activism, for training, in health. But there is a movement, but I think it's less of the sort of beautiful, giant-sized, gymnasium-sized games like Buckminster Fuller.
Yeah.
One thought on the changing the rules that I think we forget is so many things within the government are based not on specific rules, but on on custom or precedent, or it's just been the way that we've thought government should operate, right? And also on the expectation that you have leaders who believe in that precedent and those customs and will continue them. So, and that's where I think that's the biggest challenge, right? Is when we have custom being broken.
Right.
But we don't have specific rules there. How do you fix that? Do you constrain it with more rules? Or do you continue to just, have faith that you're going to have leaders who are going to continue?
But this is, I think, one of the things that actually is different today, and I use this example of gerrymandering because in the past, I think there was sort of, we're going to divide it on sort of logically as makes sense with local communities and county boundaries and things like that, as opposed to these just sort of completely invented shapes and regions to strategically game the system. So for me, games are part of the problem as well as the solution, right? This sort of game thinking where we can strategically squeeze and exploit the system, every corner of it, comes out of a sort of contemporary mindset, the 21st century thinking. Here's a system, let's brute force our way and just figure out the way that we're gonna abuse the system, right? In a way that it wasn't designed for. I don't think that's going away. So I think the problem is that, and with gerrymandering or many of these other examples of the sort of the way that this kind of the social rules, right? The social norms are being violated.
The social contract.
Yeah. So every game is a social contract, and I feel like the social contract is shifting, right? To really it's just sort of a power game, and I do think that we need to change the rules, and I don't think that it means more rules and regulations, but I do think it means using that same kind of 21st century strategic, systemic mindset to build better systems, in order to have stronger guardrails and to design systems that now we do need to iterate on democracy, right? It's a creaky old, 200 plus year system that has problems. I feel like that they're, that the problems run deep, and that for me these are akin to game design problems.
And I think that these go back to that question about how we, the people, can get back into the system and reinforce the social contract in some way. And maybe that Buckminster Fuller is a good example of how to do that. There's a few questions that are about specific games. So I'm going to throw them all out at the same. Well, this isn't really a game, but The Prisoner's Dilemma.
Classic.
Someone asked about a game called The Secret Hitler, which I think might be the werewolf game.
Yeah, it's an evolution of that.
Yeah. And then asking about how Go teaches us about conflict with China. I'm throwing out many at a time because we have 6 minutes left. So feel free to take any of those provocations or inspirations.
I'll throw in another game. We were talking about this before. One of my favorite games is Settlers of Catan.
Yeah.
I don't know if people play that. And I feel like we've been, if you're not familiar with it, it's a board, you've got resources. A big part of that is trading. You've got to trade resources. And I feel like the last couple of days we've been essentially playing that game, but unable to do the fundamental part of the game. I mean, I feel like trade and interaction is fundamental to society, and if you cut that out, you don't have the game.
Do you have one?
I'm thinking about this prisoner's dilemma. If I get the concept right, there's two prisoners, and each is told that that the one who confesses or rats out the other one will go free. And it's a question of whether you believe that's true or not. You're going to be loyal to your friend, or you're going to. Well, I feel like that dynamic is playing out in the Trump administration daily. And I don't know if you followed this, but there was this very public feud between Elon Musk and his brother, Kimball, and Pete Navarro. And they were slamming each other on trying to, rat out the other one so that their side can win. So you see that kind of dynamic playing. I don't know how to play Go, but I know it's a more complicated strategy game than chess even, but I bet the Chinese do. And they may be playing it with us right now, especially in this tariff game.
Yeah, so there's also a question about technology biomimicry. I don't think we're going to get into that, but There's a question that I did want to bring out, which was, to what extent are we aware of the games we play, conscious or unconscious? And then somebody asked for, and this is an Eric question, resources, books, et cetera, on game design theory. But I would love to hear each of you kind of give a final word on how your thinking has evolved in the last hour.
Oh, well, let me start because I'm probably the simplest evolution. I have two twin grandsons. They're 11 years old, and I was just visiting them, and we would get up around 7 o'clock in the morning and play games for about 2 hours, video games. And one of the things they're big on is Minecraft. So, of course, we saw the Minecraft movie. And I came to appreciate Minecraft because it really is this resource game. You have to get resources and you have to collect things. And if you want to make something, you have to get these 4 different objects and then fuse them together. And I realized I was watching them play it and pretending to play myself. You know, this is really life skills that they're sort of enacting out here, and who you make alliances with. So I really appreciate Minecraft as a very good game for kids to be playing. It's okay that they're spending 2 hours in front of the video screen playing this. And for me, in this last hour, I feel that's almost a similar thing. The thing that I thought was going to be a trivial exercise actually has some deep insights into it, and some of which now I have several pages of notes. And I'll see if can I turn this into an article? The games we play.
I'll look forward to reading it.
Me too.
I just kind of want to crack open a new game now after all of this. Try something new. Yeah. No, but I think, Eric, you made a really good point that games are both for good and bad, right? And so I think, I think that's something that we need to be looking at across society is what are we, whether we like it or not, we are playing games every day. And are we the good actors in those, and can we modify the rules to get a better world?
Yeah, and I would just say, building on what both of you said, for me, coming trained as an artist, my parents were art teachers who became art educators. I feel like games should stand alongside our sort of major sort of forms of knowledge and expression, right? Music and language and I feel, and storytelling. I feel like games really do have something to say about our present moment, and that the kinds of literacies that they teach about systems thinking, but also collaboration, and also the kind of iterative problem solving that we even started to demonstrate a little bit in class today. The way that they bring abstract mathematical rules together with human experience, games have a lot to teach us. So I'm a big advocate of saying, like, maybe games should be part of what the 21st century brings into a sort of basic education of people. And again, games are as ancient as these other forms of human expression, storytelling, and music. And so that's sort of the drum I'm banging. And I would welcome any opportunities to collaborate in a sort of governmental policy context as well, because I think it's very exciting to think about how these forms of knowledge can help inform each other. And I really am grateful to Alexis for putting together this panel too, so it's really been a lot of fun.
I appreciate all of it. Let's share our appreciation for this fantastic panel here.